Hey there, everybody. Marguerita here, and I am thrilled to have with me a very special guest today, Steve Nowakowski from Rainforest Reserves Australia. Now, Steve is a cartographer, author, nature photographer, environmentalist, and former pro-wind and solar advocate. Stephen is a widely published nature photographer who specialises in natural history subjects and publications. His self-publishing business now distributes widely and fulfills Stephen's desire to convey his love of nature and wild places. Stephen has been actively involved in many environmental groups and causes throughout his life. These include the Alliance to Save Hinchinbrook, founding member of Save Our Slopes, founding member of Rainforest Reserves Australia, and former committee member of the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, as well as editor of its magazine Ecotone for nearly a decade. In 2011, Stephen received a Cassowary Award for his contribution to the arts, and in 2022, Stephen was announced as the recipient of the William T. Cooper Conservation Award by the Tree, Kangaroo and Mammal Group of the Atherton Tablelands for his tireless conservation work. The recent energy transition has increasingly engulfed Stephen's time, where he has been using his skills in cartography and photography to showcase the real cost of renewable energy. Welcome, Stephen. It is an
Hi,
absolute pleasure to have you here today, and
thank
I
you for having
can't
me.
wait to dive into this conversation. I'm looking to really pick your brain. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, no, it should be
So,
good. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, let's dive in. We're being in Queensland, and my interest in this subject has been piqued recently because I live right near the Lake Barumba, which
Mm.
is under the cloud, is what I'll call it at the moment, of the Barumba pumped hydro project, one of the biggest proposed pumped hydro projects in the world. And I've seen firsthand the potential damage that's going to do to the environment locally. And I really want to get your experience and your expertise to dive into the whole base of renewables and what your position is with renewables and why. So, if there's one message that you really want to get across to people today, let's start with that.
Well, the one message I'd like to really get across is that we're rushing um, into really the unknown, and it's this mad scramble to do what no other country has ever done. So um, we're trying to convert our traditional energy system, which is thermal energy from centralized energy systems, and we're trying to replace that with an energy system where we have to harvest the wind, the sun, and Lake Barumba, for example, water, and we need to balance it with new batteries. And then we need to build a duplicate energy system of gas to back it all up when none of that works. So no other country has ever tried to do what we are trying to do. Um, Germany has tried, and they've spent $1.3 trillion building around 30,000 wind towers, and they're still one of the highest emitters in Europe with the highest electricity prices, and they're still burning coal and gas. California is a state of America. They've tried to do what we're trying to do, and they had one of the the biggest battery fire ever late last year, where a lot of their batteries burnt down. They've got the most expensive power prices. You can't say it's sustainable when you're basing your electricity system on batteries, which only last 15 to 20 years, and all the critical mineral and rare earth mining that's required to do it. So what we're doing is going down this pathway of this massive experiment, which I don't believe we can do it. And the energy engineers that I talk to, they're throwing their arms up in disbelief that we're even trying to do this. And I believe what has happened, we've been captured by ideology, and we've been captured by by renewable energy companies, and and there's so much money coming into the country from wind turbine manufacturers, fund managers, that the government is just accepting all these proponents without really assessing how this is all going to fit together and how is it going to work. And Andrew Dyer, the previous energy infrastructure commissioner in the last government, he clearly said in his report that this is a chaotic, random rollout where none of the states are talking to each other. We don't know who's building what in terms of infrastructure and power lines and transmission. And we're going to end up with a duplication of assets and stranded assets because it's being done in such a random, ad hoc, chaotic way. So our organisation, Rainforest Reserves Australia, what we want to see happen is just a stop. We just want to stop what's going on, take a big, deep breath, get energy engineers in the room to talk about all the options available using all energy generation types, and then to talk about energy in a very sane, calm, rational way, rather than this ad hoc, random, chaotic race that we're in at the moment to try to convert our energy system into something that we know is not going to work. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is the fact that this current technology that we're rushing into to replace the stable coal
Yes.
supply of
Yep.
energy that we've had in
Yep.
the past, is the new technology is underdeveloped. It's unsustainable, and it's irrational to think that the timeframes we've been given, we could actually use
Mm.
this technology to replace our current sources. And then I hear you saying that, we've got to stop and put a
Yep.
pause on it and not rush into
Yep.
it. But there are other people out there saying, but we're boiling the planet. We've got to do something and we've got to do it fast. Otherwise, we're all dead. So, how would you respond to
Yep.
that kind of what I will call hysteria
Yep.
from it's a very powerful narrative.
That's right. And I think there is a lot of hysteria in there. I personally believe that there is changes in the climate. And if you look at the data, well, if you were to believe all the data that's coming out is that we're contributing 1.3% of global emissions. So Australia, we are emitting 1.3% of total emissions. But all we're trying to do is eliminate the electricity generation, which is only 30% of that. So around 0.3, 0.4% of global emissions is our electricity generation, emissions from that. And that's all we're trying to do is trying to swap out our electricity generation. The other 30% is transportation, and the other 30% is agriculture. And we're not even looking at that as at trying to reduce emissions out of those um, two industries. So all we're trying to do is trying to eliminate, take out the emissions from coal-fired power stations. And what I mean by about what we're trying to do is swap out that thermal coal plants with wind and sun and batteries and pumped hydro, and then you need gas. What we need to do to phase out those coal plants is we need to overbuild our electricity system. Because wind and solar only runs for 20%, 25% of the day. Wind, at best, onshore wind in Queensland, we really don't know the data yet, but my analysis looks at, for Queensland, about 25% of capacity factor for onshore wind turbines. So we need to overbuild the electricity system to try to capture enough wind and sun to try to phase out that coal. So we need about 15 gigawatts of energy on a hot summer's night here in Queensland to keep the lights on, which means that we need to build around 6 to 7 times that. So 15 gigawatts times 6 or 7, we need to overbuild so we can sort of have enough, we can capture enough energy somewhere. Hopefully the wind's blowing somewhere and the sun's shining somewhere to keep the lights on. So we need to overbuild. Now, if you look at the integrated system plan, which is the holy grail of Chris Bowen's transition, it's called the integrated system plan, which has been written by AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator. They specifically say in that plan that we need to overbuild our electricity system by 6 to 7 times.
Wait, wait, what?
Yeah, so
Six,
we need Six
Seven
to,
times.
that's right, yeah. And then Chris Bowen went to the last election saying that we need to build 28,000 kilometres of brand new transmission lines to hook it all together. And 43% of your electricity bill is transmission and distribution. Yet we need to build 28,000 kilometres of new transmission. And that's the thing. So and that's the thing. So with Barumba pumped hydro, which you live near there, the pumped hydro is only one aspect of that development. You then need to build vast amounts of solar to generate the electricity to pump the water back uphill. And no one has said to me or has shown me or us where that surplus electricity is going to come from to pump all that water back uphill. Because that's the whole idea of pumped hydro. You let the water flow out at peak demand, which is generally at night time between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. So you let the water out at that time. And then in the daytime, when the sun is out, you harvest the sun through solar panels to pump the water back upstream. Where is the surplus electricity going to come from to pump that water back up the hill?
Mm.
And these are questions that aren't answered. I know, and also too with Barumba pumped hydro, as far as I know, there hasn't been any cost benefit analysis done whatsoever. And this is a government project using taxpayers' funds, yet they haven't even done a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah,
So
totally
we
sad.
don't even know if Barumba pumped hydro is even financially viable. Is the electricity that it's going to generate at that peak time, at night time, is that electricity going to be $50 a megawatt hour, $10,000 a megawatt hour, $100,000 a megawatt hour? Because we don't even know what the cost of the infrastructure is going to be, the capital costs. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. And this is the crazy thing about it. And that's what I mean by we need to stop, take a big deep breath, get proper energy engineers in the room to look at the whole energy system and work out what is needed. And I'd even go as far as to say, and Rainforest Reserves, our organisation, is very happy and prepared to say that if we need to extend the life of coal, well, so be it. And let's extend the life of coal until such point that we actually have a proper energy plan for this state.
Mm.
So the energy plan that we've got at the moment is called the Jobs and Energy Plan, and that was brought in by Anastasia Palaszczuk and then Stephen Miles. And it was actually in that plan where they said that we need the Youngalla pumped hydro, the Barumba pumped hydro, we need 6,000 wind towers, and but they're all just motherhood statements. These are just all big motherhood statements plucked out of somewhere. We don't know where they've plucked these ideas out of. There's no science behind it. There's no energy engineering behind it. And that's why we're saying, please stop. Can we just stop Barumba pumped hydro? They've stopped Youngalla pumped hydro, thank goodness.
Mm.
And let's just take a big deep breath and work out what's needed. Because it's just not Barumba pumped hydro and Youngalla pumped hydro. Like I said, there's 28,000 kilometres of new transmission. There's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of new BESS batteries that are required. And then what we need is then a new energy system, and the integrated system plan says this as well. Australia-wide, we need 15 gigawatts of new gas peaking plants built. None of them have been built yet. We need to build new gas plants to be there as backup when none of the wind or solar or batteries or pumped hydro is working. So we need to have two energy systems running simultaneously. And that's why your power prices and our power prices can never, ever, ever go down with renewables. And we hear all the time that the wind and the sun is free. Well, yes, it is, but you need to build trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure to try to harvest all of that wind and sun and build the Barumba pumped hydro and the 28,000 kilometres of transmission and all the batteries, and then a duplicate gas system to work when none of it works. It's just crazy.
It is nuts. And you talk about the whether it's financially viable. And I know that when you talk to Barumba pumped hydro
Mm.
personnel about that, they say, we're not interested in the financial aspect of it. And but the question that I asked them one day at one of their meetings was, so where's the study done on when this is going to be power positive? So like if you take into account all
Yep.
the fuel that's going to be expended with the trucks and because of all the exploratory works and the initial
Yeah.
preparatory works, not to mention all the construction and the manufacturing of the pieces that have to come in, and then the installation over 10 years, and
Yep.
all the power that's going to be expended to actually build this infrastructure. When is the power generated going to actually be power positive and exceed the power investment? And this woman just looked at me, and her jaw was literally just slack, and she went,
Mm.
that'd be a pretty big study. And I went, it's a pretty big project. You would think that you would do that kind of a study, because if it's going to be power negative for the next 30 years, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that really a good way to expend our taxpayer investment? And that's
Yep.
just that, as you said, the 28,000 kilometers of new transmission lines.
Transmission. Yep.
And
Yep.
then, I mean, it's horrific if you look at what's involved in building the wind turbines, and then that they only last for 15 to 20 years. And then,
Yep.
and then shredding the carbon fiber is another massive problem. It
Yep.
just seems completely irrational and insane, and most people haven't even thought about these aspects. So I really want to talk about, because people say, well, what's the alternative? Because coal's too
Mm.
dirty, and it's obviously the emissions from coal is killing the environment, even though you've said that our emissions are so low.
Mm.
And then you've got China and India who are ramping up. They've actually built new coal-fired power stations, and India burns dirty coal. I don't know about China.
Mm.
Um, and obviously, the United States is moving more into nuclear. So, if we're going to slow down on these projects, what do you believe? Where do you believe our focus should shift to as far as alternatives? Because we really haven't explored potential alternatives to these projects, have we?
Yep. Well, that's the thing. So this is all happening so fast that we haven't been able to stop, take a big deep breath, and just work out what is needed. And like I said, if we need to continue burning coal, I think the coal plants in Queensland will last the longest, and I think they'll stay open for many, many years to come. They are some of the latest generation coal plants. Um, and myself and the organisation I'm in, we have no problem with replacing those retiring coal plants with other coal plants utilising, the latest technology. And
Hmm.
if that involves carbon storage and capture, which is being utilised in other places, well, that's something that we need to look at. Um, and then what I'm seeing around the world is nuclear, and I was very against nuclear, and I was able to do a lot of research on nuclear, and I've just come back from a conference about nuclear, and I feel very comfortable about nuclear, and I think nuclear is going to have to be a part of the solution. That what I like about nuclear is that it has a very tiny, small footprint. We can utilize existing transmission lines. So we can build nuclear next to retiring coal plants if we have to.
Okay, before people turn off, because
Yeah,
I can
I know.
hear lots of
People
people just
saying,
going, all right, well, I've just dismissed this Stephen fella because he's all
yeah,
pro-nuclear, and we know how dangerous that is with Chernobyl and the Japanese disaster. So before we go any further, I want to really pick your brains about nuclear,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I'd love to hear because you've been very much, at one point you were very much pro-green energy projects. What was it that caused you to shift, and you were against nuclear? So
yeah.
what was it that you learnt about the green energy, that we haven't discussed already, and about nuclear that caused you to shift your perspective? Because a lot of people out there, you mentioned the N word, and they just freak out.
Yeah, so what happened for me is that I'm on the ground, bushwalking and ground truthing where the renewable projects are going in Queensland. And because I've got a cartographic background, I've been able to map what's in the pipeline. And what we're looking at the moment here in Queensland, we're looking at uh, it's around just over 6,000 wind towers. We're looking at the latest data is 410,000 hectares of solar. It's been very hard to map all the new transmission, but you're probably looking at around, say, 10,000 kilometres of new transmission in Queensland. This is just Queensland. We're looking at a proposed footprint of new roads going through wild areas in Queensland of 5,700 kilometres of new roads. So in Queensland, we don't have the wind resources like other states, like the coastal wind resources of South Australia, Tasmania and Victoria. Our wind in Queensland is up the top of all our mountains and ranges and mountain tops. And that's where they want to push the wind on top of all these mountains. And it's those mountains that have escaped industrialisation and urbanisation. They're the remnant forests. They're the places that have been too hard to farm, to urbanise, to industrialise because it's such rugged terrain. But now all these rugged mountaintops are open slather for wind farm companies, for wind. So what we're seeing is the annihilation of all of our refugia remnant forests that are left in Queensland outside of national parks for renewable projects. So we're going to see the decimation of our wild places, and that we just can't do that. That's just insane. It's insanity to destroy biodiversity in the name of climate action. It's a complete oxymoron. It completely makes no sense. And then I've had to relook at everything. I've had to relook at energy. And I thought, this is unsustainable. You just can't run a country on batteries and pumped hydro and thousands and thousands of wind turbines that only last 20 years, and you've got to pull them down and replace them. And even the concrete foundations, they can't be reused because of the fatigue in the concrete. They need to put new concrete. And if you're talking about CO2 emissions, the second highest polluting industry on earth is cement. So there's this constant cycle of just of emissions and destruction to keep this Ponzi scheme of renewables going for perpetuity. There's no reduction in emissions, and you touched on that with the life cycle of these towers would barely pay for themselves in reducing emissions, because as soon as the tower is at end of life, well, then it all needs to be somehow decommissioned. No one has actually explained to me how a wind tower is decommissioned. It just hasn't happened in Australia yet. We don't know. And it's the constant mining of critical minerals and rare earths for the magnets in the turbines. So in the new generation wind towers, there's around 1,100 cubic meters of reinforced cement in the foundations. So 1,100 cubic meters. In an average 3-bedroom home, there's about 18 cubic meters.
Holy dooly, you're kidding
Yeah,
me.
18.
Wow,
So if
that's
you look at
insane.
1,100 cubic meters per wind tower, times that by 6,000 towers that are in the pipeline, it is just epic. It is epic.
Oh,
So
the cement companies are rubbing their hands together right about now.
yeah, that's right. So um, renewables require the most amount of materials per terawatt hour of energy source in the world.
Wow.
So I'll say that again. So renewable energy requires the most amount of materials than any other energy generation source.
God, that's crazy.
Hydro requires the least, nuclear requires the second least, and then coal, gas, and then yeah, and then renewables. Because renewables just isn't the solar panels. You need to have, you know, you need to have all the transmission, and then it only works for a certain amount of time. So then you need the batteries. So batteries should really be included in the materials required for solar.
Mm,
And then you need the backup gas to run when that doesn't work. So you need to include that as well.
mm,
So people just say, oh, well, there's only a certain amount of small amount of materials in a solar panel. Well, that might be the case, but you need all this ancillary infrastructure to make that solar panel work. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Crazy.
Yeah, it's
So, and
insane.
I know that nuclear has developed a lot since Chernobyl, and obviously there were infrastructure problems with the site in Japan, and Germany decommissioned a lot of their nuclear years ago, and
Yeah,
now the 60% of the people are saying, "Can we just fire up those nuclear plants again? Because we're sick and tired of getting, of
yeah,
paying these exorbitant amounts
mm,
of money for our energy. We can't afford it."
yes,
So with the fairly recent develops in nuclear, and you can tell me because I don't know a lot about it, but I saw last year where there was a plant. One of the biggest things is because they're water cooled.
yeah,
If there's no energy going to the nuclear plant, then the nuclear reactors will heat up to the point where it's, clearly a
mm,
catastrophe in the making. But the most recent developments, they've actually created a system whereby if the power is shut off, then they can exist for an extended period of time.
yeah,
Can you explain all that to me? I'm not articulating it very well because I don't
yeah. No,
understand it.
yeah. Look, I'm not an energy engineer. I'm just someone that's taken an interest in this because it's what I'm seeing in terms of renewables. There's just so much habitat destruction, high power prices, and so forth. So I've had to look at just put all my ideology aside and look at energy again. And I went back to nuclear, and and uh, and I've been to a few workshops and so forth. And like I said, what I like about nuclear is the small footprint, the energy density, uh, also the energy security, because it's completely owned and operated by us as a sovereign nation. Whereas with renewables, all the solar, the wind, the batteries, they're all Chinese made
Mm.
and Chinese owned. So that's a really big issue. And we lose our sovereign ability to control our own energy. But in terms of nuclear, there's 455 nuclear reactors operating on Earth right now, today. And most people can only name two, and one starts with C and one starts with F. And Chernobyl was a disaster. Fukushima was a disaster, but there were no injuries or death from that reactor. Um, but there's a real big push now globally for nuclear. And I know in America, Donald Trump has just signed as part of his big bill that he wants to see a quadrupling of nuclear
Wow.
generation in America. Europe they're now really pro-nuclear. The Finnish Greens, for example, they're pushing nuclear pretty hard, and they're putting in a new General Electric 300 megawatt nuclear reactor right in the heart of Helsinki for district heating. And this is the thing with nuclear. Nuclear can actually decarbonize those really hard to abate industries like alumina smelters, steel making, district heating, and all of those. And if we need, if we're supposed to go to electric vehicles, we're not going to do that with solar and wind. You need base load nuclear to be able to do that. Um, uh, and like you were saying, the new generation, they're called Gen 4 reactors. So reactors like the Westinghouse AP1000s, which are water cooled, but there's redundancy systems in place. So if there is no power, like what happened in Fukushima, there's gravity feed water cooling. And they're just like aircraft. There's multiple redundancies in place to try to stop any catastrophe.
And what
But yeah,
about
but
the
I'm
waste
sort
they
of
generate that sort of lasts like a gazillion years and has to be buried somewhere?
yeah. So and the waste, well, I don't consider the waste an issue really, because if we were to say adopt the can-do reactors in from Canada, that they can recycle their waste. The capability is there. So with nuclear waste, we only use about 3% of the uranium uh, when it's um, when it's depleted. So when the rods are taken out, 90%, 97% of that fuel can be recycled. So it can be
Wow.
done. Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
So the waste, yes, the waste can actually be a resource and can be reused. The waste in terms of volume is not big. So for your entire life, the amount of energy that you would use from the day you're born to the day you die, for all of your energy, transportation, electricity, if you were to use all that energy based from nuclear, the entire waste would fit in a Coke can for
Oh,
your entire life's generation of energy.
God, that would be news for a lot of people. It's certainly news for me.
Yeah. So yeah, the waste is radioactive, but nuclear is the only industry on Earth that looks after its complete life cycle of waste. There's no other industry that I know of that looks after their waste. So we
Mm,
go and use our motor car, we pump CO2 in the atmosphere. That's a waste product. Exxon and Mobil and BP aren't containing that waste.
mm.
You go and buy a packet of toothpaste, you throw the container in the bin, it goes into landfill. Colgate aren't looking after your waste. Whereas at least with nuclear, waste is actually contained and managed at end of life. And I don't see the waste any worse than lead acid batteries out of your car, which there is no recycling that can be done for lead acid batteries out of your internal
No, people
combustion
go and
engine.
dump them in the damn creek
You
and then
go,
pour it
you
in
go
the
and
creek.
dump them in the creek or landfill or whatever. There is no recycling.
Mm.
And that is and lead acid batteries last just as long as any nuclear waste.
So
So
it's really quite hypocritical for people
it
to say,
depends how
"Oh,
you
what about
frame
the
it.
waste?" And when there's
It
other
depends
things
how you
to do.
frame it. So waste is managed in different ways in different countries. So in France, they store their waste underneath their reactors. America, they store their waste in concrete canisters in industrial blocks, in lots, above ground. Um, and then Finland and Sweden and some of those Scandinavian countries, they'll be utilizing that underground deep repository that's just basically just being finished now.
Wow.
So waste, it depends how you frame it and how you consider what you think waste is. Compared to CO2 waste, if you think CO2 is catastrophic in terms of climate change, well, then nuclear waste is nothing. It's absolutely minuscule. You just contain it in concrete canisters above ground like they do in America. And at some point, yeah, you can bury it underground and put it into some sort of concrete housing underground, and it's okay. Not one person has ever been harmed by nuclear waste from an energy plant. Not
Wow.
one person has ever been harmed.
Okay.
Okay, that's a
So,
fact. Mm,
and I have heard, and you can confirm or correct
mm,
me on this, that because people say, oh, but it'll take at least, we currently have a ban on nuclear in Australia,
mm,
and it'll take at least 10 years to build a nuclear
mm,
reactor. But I mean, if you look at compare and contrast this
mm,
Barumba pumped hydro project, it's sort of they're saying 8 to 10 years, but that's probably going to blow out a lot more years because already they've been unable to deliver. It's now June 2025, and
yeah,
they've been unable to deliver their environmental impact study to date. They haven't actually delivered even their exploratory works. They've had to go
mm,
back to the drawing board. So this
yeah,
project just keeps getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. And nuclear, I heard, can actually use current infrastructure because it is a stable form of energy. You don't have to build thousands of, 23,000 kilometers of transmission
kilometers.
lines.
That's right.
So is that correct?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. And this is why I don't think renewables is the way to go, is because how long will it take to build Snowy Hydro 2? How long will it take to build Youngalla if ever gets ahead? How long will it build Barumba? How
Mm.
long will it take to build 28,000 kilometres of transmission? How long is it going to take to build 15 gigawatts of new gas peaking plants? And you have to remember, we've got no gas left on the East Coast. We export most of our gas. So the East Coast Gas Reservation, guess what's happening right now? Andrew Forrest is building an LNG import terminal at Port Kembla in Sydney to import gas So we can burn gas for when his wind turbines aren't turning. So
That's
when
nuts.
Barumba Dam is not generating electricity, we're going to be burning gas. And the hypocritical part of it is that we need to import LNG gas. So what's happening at the moment is we're exporting gas out of the northwest shelf of WA, the Kimberley. So we're exporting it mostly, a lot of it to Japan as liquefied. So you have to generate energy to liquefy it, to ship it, and then it gets shipped back to Port Kembla into Andrew Forrest's port. Then it needs to be turned back into a gas, which requires more energy. And then it needs to be distributed again to keep the lights on when Barumba Dam isn't generating electricity and all the turbines aren't working because it's not windy. So the CO2 emissions in that process is abhorrent. It's just totally hypocritical. And
So the ideology and the narrative that they keep feeding us is that we have to have this to stop man-made climate change. And
yeah,
in actual fact, they're really stopping nothing. They're
there's
feeding
nothing.
another beast, follow the money. They're feeding a
It's a
trillion-dollar
trans.
industry
Yeah, yeah,
that is built on an ideology that
yeah.
once you start to scratch the surface, it actually doesn't stack up. So, now, before we got on, you mentioned something about a battery fire in South Australia. So what
Oh
happened
no,
there?
in Los Angeles. I'm sorry, in
In Los Angeles,
California.
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 Okay,
Sorry,
sorry.
sorry. I meant to
So,
say California.
so how did that, what happened there and what was the damage done to this battery?
Well, they've got the world's California is trying to do what we're trying to do and trying to run the entire state on just wind, sun, batteries. But they are hooked up to nuclear as well. So
Mm,
nuclear, and that's the thing. So you actually do need gas or coal or nuclear. And we just found out through that instance in Spain where there was the big blackout that we actually do need inertia in the system. We need spinning systems. So with coal, gas, and nuclear, they're spinning turbines
mm,
and hydro, and that enables inertia to be put through the system so there's enough frequency in the system to keep it all going, because wind and sun can't do that, and batteries. Um, so in California, yeah, they've got nuclear coming into the state as well to give them that inertia. But there was a really big battery fire. It was actually just after those big Los Angeles fires. Remember the
mm.
big fires? And
Yep.
all the media attention was on the fires, the big bushfires. And then once those fires got under control, there was another big separate fire, big battery fire, and that never really got the attention that it deserved. But
Mm.
that was huge. And then you have to wonder about, again, the embedded emissions that were embedded in those batteries has now escaped into the atmosphere and just made, if the CO2 situation even worse. It's totally hypocritical.
And now they have to rebuild that. It's a bit like I know that the solar farm at Woolgoolga a couple of years
Yes,
ago during that
yes.
great big hailstorm
The hailstorm. Yes, I visited.
damaged thousands of panels, which then have
Yes,
to all be shipped back to China. And then there's no recycling for the solar panels. I don't
that's
know
right.
what China does with them. And
No,
then
no.
they have to build new solar panels and bring them in. And it's kind of like nobody talks about that.
Yeah, so I visited Woolgoolga Solar and I was gobsmacked. It's a really big site.
It's huge.
And when you go up to these big solar farms, and it's hard to explain unless you've done it, you go up to these big solar farms and you look across the field of glass, you see all the heat shimmering off the glass, and you hear all the substations buzzing, bzzz, and it feels like you're actually on the edge of the Death Star, where it's just death.
Oh.
And my immediate instinct, because I visited quite a few of these solar factories across different states. And my immediate feeling is that they're never going to get removed. At the end of life, they're just going to stay there. These companies aren't going to remove these solar panels and replace them. They're just going to stay there. And these
Not financially
companies
viable.
and these companies are set up as proprietary limited companies, so they're all designed to fail. So at the end of life, they'll go into administration, liquidation, and walk away, and then it will be up to taxpayers to remediate and fix the sites up. I'll tell you a couple of really funny stories, but when I visited Beryl Solar Farm in New South Wales, very similar to Wooga, I went up to the 6-foot wire chain mesh fence with and there's the barbed wire on the top 3 strands, and I looked around and I didn't see any livestock. There was no sheep, no cattle, no livestock, yet we're told that livestock can coexist with solar. And I thought, wow, this is funny. There's no livestock here. So I went and door knocked some of the neighbours, and I spoke to a neighbour, and the neighbour said, oh, well, they did try sheep, but the sheep died. They got caught up in the rams, the hydraulic rams,
Oh
and they
no.
died. So 2 sheep died on the site. And then what was happening, the sheep were nibbling on the cables and destroying the solar panels.
Wow.
So the sheep didn't last long, and they moved all the sheep out, and they've never had sheep since.
So they can't coexist. And I've also heard that actually that what they're doing is because they're using in many places prime agricultural land, and they're actually
Mm.
destroying the prime agricultural land
Yes,
because you
yes,
also have, the climate change narrative. You have something called urban island heating, which
yep.
in a city environment,
Mm,
because there's very few trees and there's lots of cement, it's
yep,
increasing the temperatures within those urban environments.
yep.
And I mean, it's obviously the same with a solar panel. These massive acres and acres and
Oh, it is.
acres of
Yeah,
solar
yeah.
panels. You're
The research has been
increasing the
done.
temperature with the within that environment.
Yeah,
So, like, how does that
yeah.
work? And
Well, the
um,
research has been done. Yeah,
there's so many questions I want to ask you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Just going on
um,
that point. So, for
yeah.
example, Upper Calliope Solar, which is just that's west of Rockhampton, that's
Mm.
5,000 hectares of solar.
Holy
And that
crap.
is, so I can't even imagine 5,000. I've photographed 2,000 hectares of land clearing. I can visualize 2,000 hectares. I can't visualize 5,000 hectares of solar. That equates to about 13,000 acres of
That's
land. Yeah, and get your head around this. So Upper Calliope Solar Farm is an offset for the Rio Tinto alumina smelter. So they need to, so the alumina smelter will keep burning coal through the grid. So
yeah.
they'll keep using the grid, black and black coal, yet they need to pay Upper Calliope a fee as an offset to offset their emissions from burning coal.
Mm. Another part of the scam.
But the scam is now Rio can say that they're green.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
It's so corrupt. Um,
Yeah.
so another question I wanted to ask you. Firstly, I want to go back to the pumped hydro project. So you've actually been to visit the project.
Yes. Yeah.
I think you've taken some aerial footage of
Yeah.
the upper reservoir. So the lower reservoir is supposed to be increased by 5 times the current capacity. And then you've got the upper reservoir, which includes the building of 6 new dam walls. And the capacity of that is, I'm gathering, I believe, I don't have the numbers in my head, but I believe is bigger than the lower reservoir, the proposed lower reservoir capacity. So when you
Mm,
took the aerial footage of the new wild areas that are untouched, that
mm.
are going to be flooded, can you sort of describe the landscape up there, what it entailed? Because it's undisturbed wilderness up there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's dam construction. So it's a very brutal industry on the landscape. It's putting in really big dam walls, big concrete structures to hold back vast amounts of water. And the
Mm,
whole idea is to hold back big amounts of water, and then it will flow down through underwater, and through an underground pipe through turbines to the lower reservoir, and it will be a constant cycle of water going up and down, being pumped up and down, up and down, up and down. And like I said before, the water needs to be pumped up with renewable energy.
mm,
And I didn't even know where that renewable energy is going to come from to pump water uphill. because pumping water uphill is very energy intensive. You need a lot of energy to do that. Water is very heavy. So no one has answered my question. We don't even know how that's going to happen yet. But going back to the landscape and the forest, yes, there's beautiful forest upstream. It's the damming of valleys and catchments. It's the increase of the dam. It's a new dam. There's a new dam wall at the lower reservoir downstream. And by doing that, there's going to be, and I photographed that country down there, that's beautiful rainforest riverine area.
Mm.
So it's all intact riverine rainforest with some of the biggest Moreton Bay figs I've ever seen on earth. Really
Oh,
big. I don't know if you've seen them down there downstream, but
I've seen pictures of them, yeah.
yeah, they're really big. And that's where basically the new dam wall will be positioned. And then the height of the dam will be higher by X number of meters. So all the surrounding rainforest around the existing dam wall, the high watermark edge, all that's going to go underwater as well.
Oh.
So there's a huge impact. And like I was saying before, there's been no cost benefit analysis either done financially, but there really hasn't been an environmental analysis done either that really takes into account the destruction of endangered ecosystems and remnant forests, and then the impact of the sequestration of the CO2, because forests actually sequester CO2,
Mm.
absorb it from the atmosphere. So we're taking all that rainforest out of the system. So how much CO2 are we losing from sequestration? Because the forest there is already serving a purpose. If climate change is your issue, well, then we should be keeping forests intact. We shouldn't be clearing forests and flooding forests in the name of climate action. And
I'm so glad you brought this up because this was another point I wanted to cover. There's so many questions I want to ask you, but this was another point I wanted to cover in that if they're so worried about CO2 emissions, why don't we just plant a lot more trees? Because one tree in a life will process thousands of carbon dioxide, of carbon dioxide emissions. And I think the one of the funniest videos that I've seen in the last couple of years is where these experts say, well, so how much saturation is there of CO2 in the atmosphere right now? It's 0.04% or something insane. And we can actually handle a lot more than that. It does impact the climate, absolutely. But if we planted a lot more trees instead of ripping trees out and destroying these pristine environmental landscapes, then we'd be processing a lot more CO2. So that doesn't make any sense to me either.
yeah, and that's the thing. I suppose that's how I've actually entered into this whole energy issue, is because we're a volunteer organisation at Rainforest Reserves Australia, and we plant trees. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. So we've been trying to connect corridors of forest, so connect national parks, connecting nature refuges, so animals can move between protected areas, so the genetics won't become isolated, and and trying to replant forests. Yet what we're seeing with this energy transition is the destruction of way, way more forests than what we could ever dream of trying to replant in terms of area.
Mm.
So in a typical year, Rainforest Reserves Australia, we might plant, say, 5 to 10 hectares of land
That's a
with
lot.
rainforest. That's what we will try to revegetate. Yet the Lotus Creek wind farm right now has 4 bulldozers clearing 600 hectares of old growth forest.
Oh my God.
So whatever
I
we're
don't
trying to
think that
do
makes sense.
was being totally negated. Like I said, we need to cover 410,000 hectares in Queensland with solar. Um, and all we're doing is trying to plant 5 to 10 hectares a
Hectares.
year,
That's
revegetate.
crazy. And you
Yeah,
were
so
one of the one of the first times, actually the first time I saw you was on a video that's called Transition to Extinction. If anybody wants to go
Oh,
and
yes, yep.
watch that on YouTube, it was an incredible presentation done at JCU, James Cook
JCU.
University
Yes.
in Townsville. And I'm not going to ask you about this, but something, a lot of it was like very eye-opening to me. And one of your co-presenters, Dr. Roger Martin, was talking about the impact of the low emission frequencies from these wind turbines and how the part of, I'm going to get this wrong, but part of the structure of a koala's great big wide head is actually a lot of space in there because they have these very low frequency calls which they use to communicate with other koalas in the region up to 10 kilometers away. You introduce these wind turbines into their environment because they pick up low emission vibration frequencies. That is actually impacting on the koalas and their ability to communicate. So there's this constant hum that we might not be able to hear, but they can, that's impacting their health and well-being. What happened to a few years ago, everybody screaming about, oh, we're going to, the koala's going to be extinct in the next few years. We've got to do everything that we can to make sure that we preserve the koalas. And all of a sudden we're just clearing forestation to chuck in these wind farms that have a devastating effect on not only koalas, but so after my little rant, can you talk just very briefly about the kind of impact that these projects as a whole, the solar, the wind, the clearing and deforestation with Barumba pumped hydro has on our ecology, on our animals, on our, our just sacred native animals that we have in our country?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. That's what we need to do. We just need to stop, take a big deep breath, and understand what's going on, because this is a brand new technology that's never really been used at scale in an Australian context, particularly within our Australian forests. And what we're seeing in Queensland is these turbines, like I said, going into these remnant high elevation mountain tops. And it's these areas where wildlife still exists and actually contain some of our best koala populations.
Mm,
And like I just mentioned, Lotus Creek, and there's the Clark Creek Wind Farm, there's Mount Hopeful Wind Farm, Boomerange Wind Farm, Mount Fox Wind Farm, Upper Burdekin Wind Farm. All those wind farm locations contain some of our best remnant koala populations outside of southeast Queensland. And these turbines are going in there. And what we're finding, the low frequency sound from these turbines can be heard up to 10 kilometers away. And that low frequency sound seems like it is masking the mating call of the male koala. So the male koala gets to the top of a tree and it grunts in very low frequency sound to tell the females that it's there. And
mhm,
that female needs to hear that low frequency sound from 5 kilometers away, 2 kilometers away, 10 kilometers away. And now that male has to compete with these wind turbines, and we don't know what's going to happen. Will the females be able to hear the males from a long way away? And we
mhm,
may see populations completely crash, decline. A very interesting bit of study that Dr. Roger Martin is doing is that he's radio tagging some koalas up here in North Queensland, and he is finding that koalas won't come within 2 kilometers of a wind tower. So they're picking up on that low frequency sound and going, oh, that's really bad. I'm getting bad vibes from that. I'm not going to go any closer. So we're potentially cutting off and excluding big chunks of forest from koalas. And that's just koalas. We don't know what the impacts are on greater gliders or other possums or whatever. But what's really scary is we don't know what the impact is on amphibians, on frogs, because male frogs need to croak at night to attract a female. And that female needs to hear the male. And some of those male frogs actually croak in very low frequency sound. So again,
mhm.
they need to compete with wind towers. And nobody in Australia is doing any of this research. And this is the problem. And it's like you were saying before, there's ideology involved in this. If a university professor or an academic, an ecologist, want to try to get a grant to try to research the impact on koalas or greater gliders or amphibians, they're not going to get the research money because
Mm.
that could be perceived as being anti-renewable. And this is happening right across all the sectors, whether it be in the legal profession, the environmental profession. Um, you can't be perceived to be um, doing any research that could slow down the green energy transition because you could be perceived as being a coal lover or anti-climate change or whatever. And this is
Mm.
really, really bad. And so we want the science profession to try to look at some of these issues, but they won't. It's it's really
No,
tough.
I read that in a publication recently about the fact that if you want to do a if you want to include the climate change narrative in your research study, you're
Yep.
likely to get a grant. If you want
Yep.
to if you want to do research on the opposite, then yes, you're not likely to get that money. So they are
Yep. Yep.
stacking. And that's where people say, oh, but all these research papers, it's like, yeah, but who's funding them? Why are they funding them?
Yeah.
What's follow the money? Like
Yep.
there's clearly an incentivized system whereby the pro climate change people are getting all the money, and
Yep.
those who are saying, whoa, wait a minute, there's other data and information
Mm.
out here. We need to look at this. It's kind of like, no, la, 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 we're not listening. We're not listening.
Yep.
It's like, it's just insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
It's destroying
completely.
the environment to save the environment. It does
Yeah.
not make any sense.
Yeah. And I can see the writing on the wall. In 10, 15, 20 years' time, people are going to say, what the hell happened? Why did you go and destroy some of our best refugia remnant forests for intermittent, unreliable, expensive wind and sun, and for no benefit, for really no benefit in terms of climate action? And we've destroyed our biodiversity in the process. And I can see it. It's the writings on the wall. It's just that we're in this mad frenzy at the moment where we just need to stop, slow down, take a big deep breath, and work out what's going on because it's just crazy. It's insane.
It is insane. And
And look, I can talk to you about the birds and bats because I visit some of these wind towers here near my place. And every time I go to a base of a wind tower, there are birds and bats.
mm,
There's and we know that the monitoring of these birds and bats is being done wrong. And there's no money for proper research on the impacts on birds and bats.
mm,
And it's all being covered up and the data is wrong. We know that the bird and bat monitoring is only being done once a month underneath each tower. So when a bird falls, um, owls, other raptors come in, but most likely dingoes, feral dogs, and pigs are picking up the carcasses before they're actually counted.
oh, of course. So the
So
scavengers are coming in
yeah,
to
so what's happening? So all these dead birds and bats are falling down, which I photographed. I've got video of this. They're falling to the ground, and then at night time, the scavengers are coming in for a free feed, and they all know now that that is the place to be for a free feed every night because there's dead bats there every night.
yeah,
And when they do their monitoring, so when the proponents are doing their bird and bat monitoring, which they need to do as part of their approval conditions, they only need to do that for 2 years. And then they don't need to. So we don't know what's happening after that. So, and also when they commission, they don't need to do any bird and bat monitoring when the turbines are being commissioned. So when the towers are erected, they spend 3 months or so commissioning the towers to making sure that they're all working and they're generating electricity. In that 3 months of commissioning, they don't need to do any bird and bat mortality surveys. So if
Wow.
there's any raptors, birds, bats, wedge-tailed eagles, white-breasted seagulls, any of those raptors, which we know they all get killed because we've seen that happen, they all get killed in that first 3 months in the commissioning process. They're not recorded. So when they're commissioned, then they're killing what's left. And then by the end of the 2 years, there's no birds and bats left. They've wiped out the entire local population. And that's what's happening.
It's
And
sick.
that's what the data, and that's just bird and bats, and anyway, so there's all these issues that, we just need to, and but people can say, oh, well, one wind farm here, one wind farm there, in the scheme of things, it's not going to make a big difference. But the problem is that we're about to build 6,000 wind towers right down the Great Dividing Range of Queensland. It's the cumulative impact.
Yeah.
So it's so once we have the 6,000 towers, well, then it's really, really catastrophic. We're going to see complete annihilation of endangered species like the red goshawk, for example, the fork-tailed swift, the Pacific swift, the migratory birds. They're all gone. They're finished.
Well, the
Yeah.
Brolgas I've heard are going to be very hugely impacted as well.
Yes.
And the silly thing, and if you think about it, is once these infrastructures in place, once you destroy that part of the environment, it's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years to restore itself. And I mean, it's not a very good comparison, I guess, but my husband and I used to live on Mount Tamborine.
Yeah.
And Mount Tamborine used to have what was called at one point an inexhaustible resource of red cedar.
Yeah.
Well, they exhausted the resource because they completely cut down all the red cedar trees, and most of Mount Tamborine and that area is now new growth forest. It's the
Yeah.
same as even where we live in Imbil now. A lot of
Yeah.
that they cut out all the blackbutt, all the red cedar, and it's now new growth forest because they decimated it through forestry through the and so
Yeah.
just to go ahead and just destroy so much of the environment for this ridiculous narrative. One last thing that I want to ask or mention in relation to somebody said to me, "Oh, but have you seen the devastation of the coal mines?" I said, "Well, yeah, obviously they're not ideal. They destroy a lot of the environment and a lot of the area. But do you honestly think that the coal mines are going to be shut down because India, China are still huge importers of coal to run their power stations? And do you think that our mining industry here is just going to back off, fold their arms, and go, oh, yeah, okay, we're going to close down our coal mines? No, they're not. The coal
Yeah.
mining will continue. It'll be shipped offshore to somebody else who wants it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you're exactly right. So India, I can't remember the figures now. I think India has about 455 coal-fired power stations. China has around 1,400 and something, and they're opening 2 a week. Uh, Russia has coal plants. Indonesia has coal plants. Um, so the five biggest emitters, which are the US, Russia, Indonesia, China, and what's the other one? Can't remember now. There's the five biggest polluters on Earth aren't signatories of the Paris Accord,
Oh, really?
yeah,
That's
of the Paris
hilarious.
Agreement. Yeah. Yes.
That's
So
hilarious.
yeah, so we're trying to meet the obligations of the Paris Agreement, yet the five nations on Earth that are the biggest polluters aren't even signatories of that
My God.
agreement. In
It's
terms of exports, yeah, so coal mines are catastrophic, obviously, to the local environment. However, it's energy dense. So the energy that's coming out of one coal-fired pit, one pit of coal, can power millions and millions and millions, or even tens of millions of homes over decades.
mm,
Whereas our wind and sun and batteries and pumped hydro and transmission lines backed up by gas, which is what we're trying to do, we need millions and millions and millions of hectares of land, and then replace all that intermittent technology every 15, 20 years with new technology. So it's high turnover. So we need to dig up more stuff to replace it.
mm.
Uh, and the other thing I want to say is that coal exports are never going to stop in this state because our hospitals, our schools, our roads are all funded by coal royalties. We
Oh, I
take
didn't.
Yeah, yeah. So we pull in huge amounts of money from the coal royalties from the coal mines.
Uh-huh.
The state government is not going to close coal mines because we're not going to have any funding to keep our schools open and our hospitals and our roads.
Oh,
Otherwise, they're going to,
they don't tell you that, do they? They keep all that on the down low.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, vast amounts of royalties. So the state government is never going to close our coal mines. So we can destroy our economy, pay more for power, destroy biodiversity, try to go down this path of intermittent, unreliable renewables, yet we ship off all this coal to nations that haven't signed the Paris Agreement. Um, we export 7 times the amount of coal that we consume.
Wow.
Yeah, so we export
Oh,
7 times the amount of coal that we consume as a nation.
good Lord.
We
That's,
have 18, so we have 18 coal power stations in Australia. So we
yeah,
have 18 coal plants that we're trying to close. China has 1,400 and something. I think it's 1,445 coal plants.
it's futile.
And they're opening 2 a week. 1,445. We have 18, and we're trying to close the 18.
It's completely ridiculous. And of course, as this these insane projects are continuing uh, the Barumba Pumped Hydro project has already exploded in cost. Who do you think is going to pay for that? Your energy costs, for those listening, your energy costs aren't going to
Yep.
drop anytime soon. I was just
Yep.
we received our energy bill recently. Um, and we have a few solar panels on the roof. It's not like
Yep.
the whole roof isn't covered, but and we're very conservative on the energy that we use. So the energy that we're bringing in almost meets the energy that we're using. But they've just said on our bill, our most recent bill, that they're dropping what they're paying us for the energy that we're exporting from 4 cents to 3 cents, like
Yep.
and they're increasing the price of the energy we're using. So
Yeah.
even though we're actually producing almost as much as energy as we're using, we're still paying extraordinary amounts for our
Yep.
energy. And then what they said was, oh, we've got so much solar power being fed into the system now that it's really not that valuable to us anymore. It's like, wait, what? Why did I pay to produce all this energy for you when you're charging me so much for what I'm using and I'm producing as just as much as I'm using? Like,
Yeah.
it's such a
Yeah.
rip-off, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually going to get worse. So what's happening now is that for any new installations of solar, Australia-wide, you also need to get a smart meter.
Oh,
Okay. So
don't
we're,
like
we're in the same predicament as you. So we've got solar panels. They're about 15 years old, and they're getting to the near of their life. They're not reaching the same capacity as what they were when they were new. So they're declining. So we're now faced with the decision, do we pull them off the roof, take them to landfill, replace them, and then only get 3 cents per kilowatt hour back in, but then we're forced now to have a smart meter. And the smart meter is a way for AEMO, the Central Energy Agency, to shut down your house to save the grid because the transmission lines can't cope with the amount of solar going into the grid. So so what happens now? At the moment, everyone's rooftop solar is just being forced into the grid. So AEMO can't control the energy system. So they need to be able to control the energy system. So you and I, when we replace our solar, if we ever do, we're going to be forced to have smart meters. And that's already happening for all the new houses that are being built in Australia. They all need to have smart meters, so in the middle of the day, when you are generating electricity through your solar panel, even then, they will shut it down. So you'll be generating no electricity. You won't be generating any revenue from your solar.
that's
So,
crazy.
so it's actually going to get a lot worse. But
That is
and then
nuts.
get your head around this. So it's even going to get worse than that because now everyone's being forced to buy a battery. So these subsidies that are coming in for people to buy batteries. So everyone's going to get forced to buy batteries because that will make your power is cheaper. but it's not going to make it cheaper because, again, what will happen is that under this integrated system plan, which is what Chris Bowen is saying that we need to go down, we need to overbuild our electricity system by 6 to 7 times. But also a part of that plan is we need what they call the CES, the Consumer Energy Storage or Consumer Energy Services. And what that plan relies on are people like you and I and households to have our own solar, our own batteries, and then to be able to feed our electricity into the grid at night to keep hospitals and schools and airports open with um, so the system is relying on mums and dads and domestic homes to feed electricity into the grid at night to keep critical infrastructure alive, open. And we probably won't get paid for that either. And that is
Gosh.
a and that's a major component of the integrated system plan. And that's how I started the conversation with you today, is that we're going down this experiment that has never been done anywhere else on Earth. So we're going down this 100% renewables, wind and sun, and consumer energy services, whereby the government's going to assume that your solar and your batteries will be feeding into the grid at night time to keep hospitals and schools and airports open because there will be no baseload power to do so.
So they're just exploiting us yet again.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Well, there's so much more that I could talk to you about, Steve, but I want to honor your time. And, I mean, maybe because
Good.
we didn't talk about Poland and you've just come back from
Yeah, just come
the
back from Poland. Yeah, yeah.
Poland.
So
So,
that's a big thing to say because Poland's doing what we're trying to do, decarbonize the grid, but with nuclear. So they're just phasing out like for like the coal plants with nuclear.
yeah,
And they're doing it. They're going to build their first 3 gigawatts within 10 years at a cost of $10 billion a gigawatt. So they're actually going to decarbonize before we do. They'll probably decarbonize their entire country, I would assume, before Barumba pumped hydro gets finished, if it ever gets built.
if it ever gets built, let's hope
And
that it
they've
does.
they've got I think they've got 44 coal plants that they want to phase out. We've got 18. Yep. And they'll
Gosh.
probably decarbonize before us.
And then,
That's
I
another.
mean, the other two things that I just want to mention before we wrap it up today, I don't want to get into a discussion about it,
No,
but
no.
there's a very abundant resource called thorium,
Yes.
which Thorium, which
Yes.
can actually be used in conjunction with or in place of nuclear. It can't be weaponized. It's incredibly
Yep.
abundant.
Yep.
It's incredibly
Yep.
dense source of energy. I think it was somewhere in Norway. Yes, it's still in
Yes.
developmental
Yep.
stages. But imagine if we put, instead of putting all these billions of dollars into this green energy, if we put billions of dollars into developing something like
Yep.
thorium as a heavy energy dense resource. And also, we've got all these rooftops just sitting here. Why don't we re-incentivize, if you want to go solar,
Yep.
re-incentivize, which like we were doing 10 years ago, helping consumers to put solar on their roofs because you're not destroying the environment. The land is already, it's like,
Yep.
it's already got a house built on the land, so you're not destroying the land. And you've got thousands and thousands of hectares of real estate that is just sitting there that you can use to put more solar on as part of the, but then of course you have to restructure the grid. So, it's
But there
six.
should be, there should also, but there should be the opportunities for people to get off the grid as well.
Yes,
You know, which they don't want you to. They actually want you to pay for power. So even if you've got solar and batteries, they still need you to pay for power because someone needs to pay for the grid, the poles and wires. You know,
yeah.
and that's the
Well, that's
thing.
the thing. What if we made everybody like self-reliant, And I have friends who've done it. They're all fully self-contained. They don't rely on the grid.
Yep,
They provide all their own power.
yep,
And
yep,
why don't we incentivize that for goodness sake? As you
yep,
said, follow the money. Follow
yep,
the
yep,
money.
yep, yep, yep. So like I said at the very start, we just need to stop, take a big deep breath, and sort this energy stuff out because we're going down this $1 trillion black hole. In actual fact, the integrated system plan, which has been modelled by University of Queensland and the Princeton Institute, or Princeton University. They did some modeling, and for us to, because like I said, we need to expand the scale of our electricity grid by a factor of 6 to 7 times with wind, solar, batteries, transmission, gas. To do that will cost somewhere between six to $7 trillion. Yeah,
Whoa,
nationally. Yep, and that's pretty. And that really is.
that's ridiculous for the
Well,
size of our economy.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
good.
When I do the sums for all the wind farms in Queensland, we're looking at about $1 trillion in capital just for all the wind farms in
Oh,
capital
that's
costs in greenfield sites. So that sort of makes sense when you include all the offshore winds
uh,
and all the hydrogen production and all that. Yeah, you're looking at that price point. So, and that's what I mean. So we're going down this multi-trillion-dollar black hole on a system that's never been tested anywhere. Um, and a lot of that cost impost is on you and I to install new generation solar batteries with smart meters. And we don't know we just don't know. We just need to stop, take a big deep breath and sort this stuff out.
and of course,
Yeah,
our governments don't care because it's our money. They're like,
that's
oh,
right.
well, if
We'll
it
pay the
doesn't
price.
work, so what?
Yeah, it's all, and the ironic thing is what we're doing is pumping power prices up. We're providing unreliable energy and electricity. So therefore, industries just going to India or China and burning their coal, which is cheap, because they can't do it in Australia. And that's why we're seeing emissions. There is slight emissions in Germany, that the emissions are going down. But the reason why emissions are going down in Germany is not because they've spent $1.3 trillion on wind and sun. It's because industry is moving their manufacturing offshore to India and China and emitting their emissions from other countries. So they're taking their heavy emitting industries out of the country. And that's what's happening in Australia. So we're going to see our alumina refineries, our steel industries, and our cement and all that industry is going to have to go offshore. And if we do get any reduction in emissions, that's because our heavy emissions industries will just simply go offshore and emit from other countries. Yeah.
That's insane. Well, look, thank you so
Anyway,
much. I could continue to talk with you, but it's
that's
I've got to
great. It's been
respect.
really, yeah, it's been fantastic. So thanks so much for having me on, and it's been a real pleasure. So thank you.
No worries. If people want to actually, where will they find Rainforest Reserves Australia?
Um,
Because you have a Facebook page, don't you?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page and we've got a website, and we've got a lot of information on the website about current renewable projects that are having a lot of impact on places of high biodiversity. And yeah, so the best thing to do is to go to the Rainforest Reserves Australia website, follow the links, and educate yourself around some of the really bad projects. I think Barumba Dam's on there as well.
Mm.
Some basics, and that's, yeah, so go there and check it out and become a member if you can. Yeah.
The future of our world is at stake, and our country. So thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah,
It's
well, thank
been
you.
an absolute pleasure, and I hope to catch up with you very soon.
Thanks so
Cheers,
much. Thank
everyone.
you. Okay, thank you. See ya. Bye bye.